Hey, good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Too. And tonight we have a very, very special guest, Sister Azima. She's here to share some information with myself and the chat and everyone. One of the great things, and I told her this behind the scenes, is when sometimes when you talk to someone who is a little older than you, an elder, and they have seen and experienced a lot more in life than you have, it's always good to be able to just take notes and just listen. So, everyone in the chat, make sure you guys hit the like, share, and if you're new, hit the subscribe button. And tonight we're going to have a very interesting conversation about the educational system and its effects. And it started with me and Sister Azima and myself. We had a conversation. I think it was about Sexy Red and Sukihana,
Right.
and she did gave me some very very valuable information to go with that, and conversation led to something broader, more information, and it's an honor and a privilege to have her join us tonight. Sister Azim, how's everything going?
Everything's fine. Can everybody hear me
Well,
clearly?
they can hear you well.
Okay.
I hope they
Well,
can.
everything's fine.
Excuse me, that was me. But anyway, hopefully, Sister Azim, let us let myself and everyone in the chat know who you are and some brief background about yourself.
Who I am. I'm a very calm, peaceful person. If you believe that, I can sell you anything. um, Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. My grandfather was born at the end of slavery. He had seen his siblings dispersed during slavery, but they were able to get back together. My father was a firsthand victim of the massacre in East St. Louis in 1917. And I had an opportunity to go to the local schools here in St. Louis area, graduated from high school, went on to college, um, got a degree there, and ended up working for NASA in the aerospace industry. My job was to do the countdown, which you would hear my voice, as well as do the electronic monitoring of the medical or physical stats of the astronauts while they're entering space and re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and during their flight. I did that for about 18 years. And then from there, I came back to St. Louis, got together with my twin brothers, and we got back involved with my mother and father's dream doing community service work. I ended up getting an opportunity to be the director of one of 16 community education centers, got about $10 million in grants and dispersed it, split it up with the other sites. Was trying to have a situation where we wouldn't have to mimic each other's programming, but where schools were clustered together, people can go to each school and get a particular skill set. I started introducing CDL into the community education program for adults in the evening. That went on for about 5 years. And then I worked for American Red Cross for about 10 years and retired. So I'm retired now. That's the key thing in my life. I have limited stress. I have more time to study and research and all the things that I had learned throughout my life, which came to me in waves or what I call eye openers or door gatekeepers, giving me information, some very key pertinent people. I wasn't always able to have the time to go and research it in depth. And now I have that time. But whatever I have, I always like to share that information, whether it's in a group setting or in a personal setting or a private setting. Some of the information I had before, it kind of led me to having my house burned down, to being shot at. So I learned to disseminate, have better discernment on what I would say. So it has been years before I've even put my face out here and talked about a lot of things. I may have talked about it in private. And at that time, me and my husband would talk extensively in private or small cloistered groups of people. Our goal was to believe in the power of seven. And what that is that if you have seven people in the room and the eighth person comes in, and the eighth person comes in, and you're sharing a secret, by the time it gets to the eighth person, it will have changed and become a lie.
Mm.
And so we've realized that in society, in all cultures, there's just seven attributes of keeping a culture together, a society or civilization together. And the one thing my husband and I always felt it was necessary to do was that we wanted our people to understand, not understand. Because when you understand, that's two words, under and stand. Stand is the position you take. Under, it means that you are standing for the rules, regulation, concepts, views, ideas, thoughts of someone else. And you would fight for that other person's views, concepts, or whatever. But it may not adhere to how you feel internally. So we always ask that you understand, because the minute you place those concepts and ideas within you internally, you'll go, oh, that doesn't work for me, or oh, yeah, I can go for that. And then you can take a position. So you're going to learn what understanding means. You're going to learn etymology. Etymology is the ability to take words and go back to its root and origin. And since we were the only people on this planet, long before any others came, because civilization has been on this planet for over 2 billion years. Not 5,000, not 7,000, not 20,000, 18,000, or 36,000. It has been here for 2 billion years. And we were all one group of people, melanated skinned people. Um, and that's not a specific choice, it is how the universe is designed. Energy comes in waves, and the waves of strong energy is always black matter energy. And they have you thinking it's the devil. 666, six protons, neutrons, and electrons. It's carbon. And when it becomes carbon, it's like me. It's like Brother Quentin. It's melanated. And it's the most powerful form of transmission of divine language, which we call the Maduneta. That has nothing to do with Kemet. It ain't got nothing to do with the people, the Mayans. It's just divine speech. That's all that it means. And divine means that it's indivisible. When you divide it down, it goes to one. And that speech means all of us hear it the same way. Whether you're speaking gibberish or clicks or whatever, when it hits me, I hear what you're saying. I feel what you're saying. I have the ability to intuit from within. That's why I have understanding and not understanding. Because when you have understanding, you're taught, there's so many languages. But when you understand, it's natural. So we're going to learn that. Etymology, which is in the origin of words and what they really mean and how they impact you. Critical race theory. Oh my goodness, that's going to be fun because everybody thinks it has something to do with talking about slavery and all of this. No, it has everything to do with policies written that directly affect melanated skin, copper colored, carbon based entities, you and I. And it comes from the political realm, not the educational realm. And then we're going to learn about No Child Left Behind and how the educational system since the end of slavery which also impacted the indigenous population of Black people who lived here who didn't come on a boat from Africa here, how they were relabeled, integrated in, and the academic system did not want to allow our own natural proclivity to success to stand in the way of white people. And it's not anything I'm talking about from my own feelings. We have some documentation here, and we're going to talk about an article that was written by a scholar from Kentucky University who's talking about critical race theory and how all of that impacted everything right up to No Child Left Behind. So when I talk, I want to give my receipts so that everyone understands or understand what is going on.
Great.
And then I want to teach you that you don't have to be a victim. That's the key thing. Once victimhood leaves your mind, your whole mind opens up to a different perspective. Because I had to listen to the research guy from St. Louis. He's adhering to his indigenous roots, what we call the American Indian roots. And there's nothing wrong with it. I love him to death on it. But he had something that his little TikTok that was very interesting. And he just says it in a better tone. And the tone is that if all you know is your environment, then you are limited to that environment. Therefore, your
Mm.
academic achievement or the expansion of thought doesn't go anywhere. It just stays right there. So I'm going to teach you how not to be a victim and how to expand that and to get a chance to look at some realistic things. I mean, we have been we've been here 2 billion years. So there's nothing new under the sun and we've always done what we want to do. So that's basically who I am. And this is what we're going to talk about today. The No Child Left Behind and how it left a lot of us behind and how the pros and cons benefited those who were in control of the policies that they wrote, comes under critical race theory, to make sure that the particular group of people they're interested in uplifting had all of the benefits. And you're going to learn that magnet schools were not something white people developed. It was something we developed as a group of people to improve our situation and how the policies became part of the academic rules at the federal level, and it swooped down and removed us from programs we invented. Remember now, free lunch, okay, kindergarten, um, many of the academic programs you see today that came from Black Panthers. So you need to know and be well informed. And this is not a means to make you arrogant or ignorant. In the beginning, you'll be. We all are. Oh, look at what we did. Wow, we're all that way. That's understandable. But as time goes on, you
Hmm.
realize that you have to help the people around you do better because when you die, you're leaving behind your children, your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, people that are important to you, and they'll still be fighting the same issues. So we need to not live in the fishbowl. We need to flop out of the fishbowl and jump into the ocean because it's just more expansive. And I don't mean the oceans or bodies of water on this planet. I mean the ocean, which is the universe. Okay, because it speaks to you every single day. You just don't know how to hear it or listen to it or absorb it. And also, what this does is that as you expand your consciousness, it will help you change your perspective. You will work for the betterment of you and for the collective of your group of people in turn. So that's me.
Yeah. So when we look back 2 decades after No Child Left Behind and the ramifications, Explain to us. I say ramifications because we definitely picking up the mess because we're dealing with it right now, right?
Okay,
Explain to us the standard prior to that, the educational standard that we were on.
it was called the Elementary Secondary Standard Act. That came on the heels of critical race theory that this professor here, Todd McCardle, talked about. And that came about at the end of the Civil War. Critical race theory came about at the end of the Civil War, and it was to provide a means to have an institutionalized strategy to maintain racial segregation in American public schools. Now, I'm going to repeat that critical race theory and the interest and conveyance principle within CRT was to provide the framework for analyzing how tracking has served as an institutional strategy to maintain racial segregation. So, what they're basically saying is that critical race theory allowed politicians to develop a method of tracking the number of freed slaved people, methodology of educating themselves to do better. Now, why is that important? Because the real McCoy existed during slavery time. He was a black man, as usual, who knew how to build and construct a lot of things. The cotton gin came from us. Okay. Think of all the things we invented that came about an improvement in the frying pan, just tools that you're using. If you are the person that has to use that particular tool for a job and that tool isn't working, you're going to develop a way to make it better, to make your work better, to lighten your load. So if we're the ones that are out here doing the work, we're the ones that are going to be the inventors. You're never going to give us credit because your slave master had that right. So what they wanted to do, since the system already understood, remember now, Lincoln didn't free us out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted to keep slavery, but he did this to keep America as a united country. America, United States of America, is a corporation, people. Please hear me clearly. The United States of America is a corporation. Okay. The Republic of the United States is the country. America is a country that sits on the continent of North America, which includes Canada. So don't get it twisted. There were three Americas on this side: North America, Central America, and South America. So Guatemala, Mexico, Nicaragua, that's in Central America. Canada and the United States, Alaska, that's in North America. South America is Brazil, Peru, Chile. That's South America. So the United States of America is a corporation. Go and look at your history under Eisenhower, and he walked away and said he made a terrible deal. He gave the country to the military industrial complex, and he was unhappy. Go back and look at Martin Luther King. Even your people sold you on the concept that he wanted to be peaceable. Okay, Mahatma Gandhi was not a peaceable man. And if you thought he was mimicking that man, he was mimicking the true Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi didn't like us. Even though he was a brown man, he didn't like black people in America. He didn't like Africans from Africa. Your hero, Martin Luther King, realized before he passed, and he made that statement because he wrote it down and he eulogized it in one of his speeches. But of course, you don't ever get to hear that speech. His statement was, I've taken my people and I've given them the power to walk into a burning building only for them to die. And that's what he meant by segregation. Integration, I'm sorry. He wasn't interested really after he talked with Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and quite a few other people in Africa and around the world, it was not beneficial. But by the time he made a switch to start talking about it, he was assassinated. And even the people who were under him, Snick and all of them that were right there, and the NAACP and all of that, you have to realize that if you are a business, you've got to put your best foot forward. So if you wanted to make change for Black people, you couldn't put the little fat Black 16-year-old pregnant girl who wanted to ride the bus at the front of the bus because she was too sick to go to the back of the bus and stand. You gave us Rosa Parks, and you set Rosa Parks up to go and sit in the front of the bus. So you have to really know, and that is what has happened over the centuries. How I got to this, I was working one day at work with NASA. Thought I knew all about myself, had my fro and everything, and the Asian guy came up to me. I'll never forget him, Terry Nakamura. And he said, "Ah, you think you know your history, Black sister?" And I started laughing. I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "No, you don't." And he brought me pictures. And he showed me pictures of his family. They were darker than me. They were black as night. And they were Ainu. And he said, "Learn your history. Learn how everybody uses you to get what they want. You as a collective body." And so this is what's going on here. The Elementary and Secondary Standard Act came about under Lyndon Johnson. Why? Because he had to do two things. After Kennedy was assassinated, he had to calm down the Federal Reserve, and he had to appease Black people under Martin Luther King. And that's where King told him, "We're not interested in integration. We want we want equal opportunity. So get down out of our way." Like James Brown said, "Move over, I'll do it myself." That's what he was basically telling him. That was not what he wanted. So he instituted the Elementary Secondary Standard Act. What that did is that it allowed every state to set up its own academic achievement standards. But it didn't have to fit any criteria that assisted the education of freed Black slaves and the descendants of the free Black slaves. Okay, so I was born in the 50s. So that meant that slavery was 80 years from when I was born. That's not a long time. My grandfather lived to be 100. His sisters lived to be 115. So I had a chance to talk to him about a lot of things, and he expressed those things with me, things that he invented. My father invented a lot of things but could never get it patented. And this is after the Civil War. And the reason he couldn't was because they would always say, "Well, that particular piece of thing that you're using, that screw, that nut, that bolt, that spring belonged to this white man over here. He patented first, and we can't patent this." And he made the paper bag machine. The one paper bag that went over clothes, because it was Black people that developed dry cleaning. His name was Samuel Willis. And then my father, Samuel Kennedy, invented a paper bag machine to cover the clothing because he was tired of seeing Black women lose their fingers to the blades and to the glue. And then on the heels of that, he created a brown paper bag you see in grocery stores, the one that's folded. Black women had to fold those bags, and they had to put their hands blindly into a machine, and they had to learn to move it fast enough to keep from losing their fingers. So he created and developed a lot of things, but we never hear about these people. So with the Elementary and Secondary Standard Act, it was to allow, like I said, each state to develop a curriculum for academic achievement, but it had to follow the guidelines of critical race theory, a way to track the success and academic achievements of melanated, copper-colored, carbon-based people, Black folks. And they wanted to be sure that the curriculum was effective enough to only allow you to excel to a certain academic achievement within the environment that they were creating for you. That standard lasted a long time. But you know how we are. We're going to hound you. And we did. We marched, we protested. The Brown versus Board of Education Act came along. On the heels of that, we began to demand better opportunities. Our teachers were always outstanding because they went to Black institutions of higher learning to learn how to teach us. We were always in what we call a collective environment in your classroom. If you didn't know something and somebody else knew it better, the teacher would pair the two of you together and you could work together as a team, which would help elevate you. You may not be the A student, but you're not going to be a failing student. If you
Hmm.
just get to the level of C, that's fine. Nobody was ever denigrated and nobody was ever laughed at on purpose because we didn't have time for that. Okay. We had to be successful because the only way for us to move up out of where we were, we had to be successful. And so we had to be outstanding as a doctor. We had to be outstanding in the field of nursing. My mother went into nursing and she began to teach. And she would come home really frustrated because she had to teach two different curriculums, one for us and one for them. And she said that was crazy because a lot of times the white people couldn't grasp or they wouldn't grasp or they didn't want to because she was a Black woman. Why do I have to learn under her? But she was the outstanding teacher. More students graduated under her that were very proficient in being LPNs and RN nurses than the other instructors that they had ever had. So she worked for Bourne's Jewish children. They loved her. She was outstanding. And so eventually, over time, they just integrated the curriculum and told, we're not going to divide this curriculum. We're not going to teach one way for you and one way for everybody else. No. And so it really made better nurses. It even taught them compassion because nurses towards Black people didn't have compassion because they felt like we were animals, that we didn't have pain. And so with the Elementary Act that was came about under Lyndon Johnson, the states had autonomy over what they did, and each state was doing fine. But as more and more of us began to complain and see the disparity in the educational system, we always brought up the Board of Education versus Brown. Okay, we always brought that up. We had great lawyers that went in there and fought for the things that we needed in order to make change. That change came under the standardization of No Child Left Behind. The No Child Left Behind came under George W. Bush in 2000. And what that did basically was that academic um, proficiency and the method of developing your curriculum could no longer be done state by state because what they have found out was that we love to move. Black people love to move. So we could live in New York and had an educational system there and went down south and we'd be like, "Ooh, Lord, this
Yeah,
is not
we're gonna
working."
we're gonna make our situation. We're gonna try to make our situation better if we can, regardless.
Right. And
Yeah,
so you go to California and you're like, "Woo, Nelly, good."
yeah.
It's just
Y'all
endless.
behind.
Right. And so we said, no, 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 we're going to have to standardize this some kind of way. All the states have got to at least be on par at some level, have at least one or two schools that are universally the same in their whole teaching process because the teaching process was crazy. It really was. It was based on the state. So if you were in a state that formerly was a slave state, and Missouri was a border slave state, you did not find it necessary to have a curriculum that allowed Black people to be proficient, Negroes, quote unquote, to be proficient in anything similar to what European people, white people were doing. Um, it only really became an issue. The South already had it, they had it wrapped up. So those deep Southern states had it wrapped up, and they basically talked to each other and they knew how they wanted to educate the masses of Black people all the way up until the 70s, all the way up to 2000. Okay. It was the northern states that, as they realized the migration of us from the south to the north, we began to exceed their white population in key cities, which meant we voted. When we voted, now here we have to look at everything. Nothing works in a vacuum. There's no such thing as a vacuum, but they'll make you believe that everything works in a vacuum. They teach you segregated learning. Learning, you can't learn segregated. That it doesn't work like that. You have to work in a bubble because everything touches something else. And people don't realize that because you have been conditioned to believe you have to learn in a vacuum. So, with that conditioning, it tends to make your environment small. And what we have found out is that many European people worked better in a cloistered or small environment where that environment elevated them to a level of arrogance and privilege on the backs of others that did the work for them. So, once again, when George W. Bush came in, he had already seen the pressures that was going down. He was seeing how the critical race theory piece was not going to be a benefit in the long run. They decided that the federal government, and I want you to learn the meaning of the word federal. It comes from the word feudal, and feudal means king and queen. And of course, America was controlled by the Queen of England. Whether you all know that or not, study the history. The 13 colonies came here under the Queen of England and they pretty much took over. So the federal government began to set up mandates to make it standardized across the board how teachers would teach, what the curriculum should include, um, what proficiencies or benchmarks or guidelines have to be met by the school and by the student. Their key thing was language and math. Really?
Mm.
Well, what happened to geography, history, and science? All of that plays a role in the whole learning process. Music plays a role. And I know all of you all are thinking, well, that's separate, but I'm getting ready to show you how it's not separate. So um, that standardization on the surface looked very wonderful. We're going to weed out the bad teachers. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But what it also introduced was massive busing. Children were bused from communities that they were familiar with. So let's say you're in a you, black mom and dad, or the single parent. You have four children. They're not going to bus all four of your children to the same school in the county. They would take one. Now you can't get out there if there's an issue with your child. You got to wait till your child gets home and suffer the consequences as edicted by the school because they're going to follow that rigid guideline that was set up by George W. Bush and the Congression, the Congress and the Senate. Why does the Congress and the Senate have a hand in your educational piece? Because they are in bed with corporations. And corporations need to, America is a corporation, remember that. They need to have an underdog. They need a built in slave group of people, a built in society of downtrodden people. And so for white people, they would be what they call poor white trash, which is a terrible thing, just like the names they call for us. And these tend to be white people on the lowest level of life. They need to be able to arrest them, put them in jail, and have them do work. Um, and I guess you're saying making license plates, they make everything in prisons. Are you aware of that? They build furniture. They those that have the right, they help create plastic gloves, medical supplies, not
They're
necessarily
essential.
equipment.
They're essential workers to our economy.
Right, very much so. They're the backbone of your economy. And so you got them in there doing this stuff. At the time I was growing up, I think they were earning 25 to 50, 25 to 55 cents an hour. At least people were then earning 5.55 an hour. They were earning 55 cents an hour. And so the Educational Elementary Secondary Standard Act wasn't able to improve on anything because now black folks were making an issue out of a lot of things, and they needed to stop that. So they went to this No Child Left Behind Standardization Act, House Resolution Bill 283, a nightmare that unfolded. One of the things written in that nightmare was that you only had to have a 10th grade level of understanding and comprehension. 10th grade. At a time when we are looking at computers, digital technology, we only want you to be smart enough to look at everything in a 10th grade level. And those, which we call the creamers, that rise to the top, you'll have a few token black people. And then you're going to have, at that time, a lot of Asian people were in America being doctors, right? We go to the hospital, the clinics, that's what you see. And that's because that was all part of the critical race theory. You would rather have an immigrant from another country supersede black people who were superseding white people. If you looked at college, we were going to college. We were the middle class. A lot of us didn't know that. How do we get to be the middle class? All of this is pertaining to education. It's because our parents became supervisors and managers, and a lot of them ended up working at the post office. A lot of them worked for companies that kept you on for 20 and 30 years. And so you moved up the ranks. And as you moved up the ranks, you made more money. And what did we do? We moved out of where we felt it was harmful and hurtful for our children into places like the near suburbs or the suburbs of many of our major cities, around our major cities, to do better. We bought homes out there inexpensively. We paid them off. We became the wealth. That bothered Reagan, that bothered Nixon, because now when you have that power, it changes the dynamics, and now they can determine what goes into the school systems. And so Bush didn't want any of that. They had to find a way to get back to their paradigm, and their paradigm was racial segregation, academic segregation. And so you do that by creating new programs. The Board of Education at the federal level didn't even create this. The politicians did. And they decided what was going to be in that bill. And part of that bill was that No Child Left Behind meant that you only had to be proficient in reading at a 10th grade level and understanding math so you can make change for yourself. And they took that away from you when they gave you a plastic debit card. Then you didn't have to worry about adding. They put in digital computers. You couldn't make change. The computer would tell you how much to give back to a person. And they said that was because so many immigrants came here, they couldn't understand the money we had. Well, you had a lot of Chinese people here before you even had cash registers. You had a cash box, and they made change very well. Okay. You had Italians here that used the cash box, and they made change very well. So it was all back to this piece, and I've sent the information to Quentin, and he'll put it up there if he can for you all. I would like for you all to read this. It's called A Critical Historical Examination of Tracking as a Method for Maintaining Racial Segregation. And this is where critical race theory played a major role, and it went on to determine the influence of the white northern missionaries and the industrial philanthropists. These people came together. Your white churches came to support black churches who went to white philanthropic organizations to get funding for black schools as long as they followed a certain guideline, critical race theory guideline. And if teachers or principals spoke up about it, they were a problem and they had to go. So if you have what we call No Child Left Behind, these new guidelines and standards, those teachers and those educators at any level of education became a problem. Superintendents, principals, teachers, prime teachers, head teachers, they had to go. And you would find a way to make them leave. They either were at retirement and you forced them out with early retirement, or you would damage their credibility that they couldn't go and teach at other schools and they would have to look at something else to do. So, with this, what happens with our children? They end up being isolated. The downfall is that it didn't improve academic achievement at all. It further segregated the whole learning process. And let me explain how that works. You want the child to learn fractions. Most of our children sing, it's a natural gift to them. Not all of them dance. I know. I know some black folks that don't have any rhythm, but we could sing. Okay, we were in that church singing. All right.
Hips all
Oh,
tight.
let's
What
sing
do you
that.
mean you can't wiggle?
I can say that because I have some family members. They're beautiful to look at. Don't let them dance. No, no. And these are some I gave birth to. I'm like, no, babe, no. But what what I did when I was with community education was that I would take a music teacher and a math teacher and I would put them together to work with children. Why? Because when you sing, every note written down for you to sing is a fraction. A half note, a whole note, 3/4 note, 1/4 note, 5/16, 3/16. You're learning fractions when you're singing. A staccato is 3/16 note. Ah, ha, ha, ah, ha, ha. Okay, so now when you're singing that and you're learning that, you're teaching a child that is 1/16, 1/16, 1/16. And we would tell them to do that. When you're going to do a staccato, instead of doing the note, ah, ha, 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 you go 1/16, 1/16, 1/16, and then they can realize, oh, that's a 1/16 note. We are now learning fractions. You take those same students, you get the gym teacher and the math teacher. We're going to put them out there to play basketball. I love a basketball court because on the basketball court is every geometric shape that there is. And you can teach them that when you stand right here on this line, this is an obtuse angle. When you shoot, you're going to make 5 points. When you get over here on this line, and you stand, that's an acute angle. You'll make 3 points. Okay. Now we're learning triangles. Okay. We are learning cylinders, cylindrical things. We are learning that a circle is 360 degrees, and where you shoot when you're standing on that circle determines how many points at that basket. Now you're going to vector angles. Now we're learning a different aspect. You've got geometry, you got fraction, and now you're going to learn trigonometry because you're going to learn how to project or shoot at a particular angle. But of course, you don't teach this to our children because our children learn in the round. They don't learn in the segregated.
Mm.
We learn by sound vibration. We are tactile. We read. We are multidimensional learners. So you must teach in a multidimensional plane. And we were doing that when I was younger. That's what they did. You didn't have middle school. You had kindergarten through eighth grade. The things that eighth graders knew, they were required once a month to work with kindergartens, first graders, and second graders. They learned patience. See, because this is a bubble society. They learned how to create community families and not static families, just your personal family. They learned how to disseminate what they thought and felt with younger children who always loved to hear what you had to say. So it allowed them to express themselves. They became better at writing. Little children learned to spell. They began to hear words vibrate. And in tune and in toot, this word means go or stay or dog or cat or thee or the. Um, just the mere fact that that is how we learn. When you put a No Child Left Behind program in place, you basically are removing the ability to think in the round, to have tactile, visual, and sound learning all at the same time. Other groups of people find it necessary to learn one thing at a time, a specific way. We do not learn like that. We learn in the round, all inclusive. So it took them 20 years to really come to the conclusion. 20, 2008, it was a failure, a rapid failure. 2012, Obama said, we're not doing it anymore. The pressure was on. The Department of Education couldn't tolerate it. We were not making it at all. When you go out and look at the statistics, because I want you to go out now and go to United States Department of Education, statistics on academic achievement, and they will tell you that at one time America was third or fourth in the world. I want you to know they didn't start measuring academic prowess until the North, United States of America Corporation, the northern part of the United States of America, began to let more European immigrants in. And so they had to apply the CRT program because they never wanted us to exceed our environment. And that's also when they began to crack down on our environment because you have to look at what was going on. That's also the time you had crack cocaine, heroin in our neighborhoods. I never saw that growing up. I'm not saying it didn't exist, but it was not prevalent. Um, the laws changed. Remember, politicians are determining the academic standards, not your Department of Education. It is when they realized that more of us were going to college that they needed to interrupt that. That was also the time when the Vietnam War came about and we were looking at fighting, Hezbollah and them over in Middle East of what? Of Africa? Okay. So with that, that was the time when many young black men who were college bound for the HBCUs, who had plans to be medical doctors, for um, sports doctors, sports medical doctors, engineers. They ended up going to jail for controlled substance, marijuana, 15 to 20 years of life. White guy had cocaine, he'd go 5 years. You're going to do 15 years, 20 years to life for marijuana. Really? Put them in the harshest prisons that they could. All of a sudden, after 15 years in, they would be exonerated. The program where these lawyers do the stuff, the ACLU and all of that, it was just amazing how they took them 15 years, but they had to find strategies and read the laws, critical race theory, which was really for lawyers, judges, and politicians to go in and see what laws that you put on the books for the purpose of inflicting pain and suffering on us at every step of the way. Once they began to get all these men out and they were able to sue and start receiving this money, they couldn't have their lives back. A lot of them ended up committing suicide because they couldn't live out in this world. That's a big adjustment. It's like being born at the age of 40 and you're thrust into this world. You don't know what to do. You are an adult now. Nobody's going to wean you or whatever. You don't know what to do. And so they began to develop other programs to help them be survivors. The failure rate among African American students, I'm not saying some didn't succeed, some did, but there was more minority students that didn't succeed, that they weren't too concerned about until it reached a point where even their white students weren't able to succeed. The more we were not able to succeed, the more it impacted the funding for certain aspects of these programs, the No Child Left Behind. When Black people said, we're done, and they began to take their children out and start having alternative forms of education, and those children were succeeding and getting into Harvard, then what? And then you realize that there would be no more funding. Funding was based on the number of Black people that you can put into a school system and have them fail. These industrial philanthropists were throwing money at that. They could write it off their taxes. It looks like they're helping you. The books that they bring in are totally unrelated to you. You can't relate. The new method of teaching math was ludicrous. Even the teachers who were teaching it knew it was ludicrous. When it began to hit their own, of course, they had to say something. How did it hit their own? By the number of parents that were pulling their children out, working with them and putting them back into local schools, or homeschooling them if they could, or working with teachers that were forced out but still wanted to do something with children, and they were. And they were developing curriculums that made our children succeed. We created the magnet school for the purpose of our children succeeding under such harsh conditions in the regular Elementary Secondary Standard Act. So much so that the politicians looked at that and decided, we are going to write certain guidelines, impose them on, they didn't even have to impose them because they were like-minded people, even in the Board of Education at the federal level, that they ran with that and began to open up the floodgates to allow as many white children to go to the magnet schools, where they were going to have all of this focused in attention on them to help them succeed. Then magnet schools failed. When the magnet school failed, but we were still achieving some level of academic success compared to everybody else. And let's run a statistics here. Right now in 2020, when they did a statistics for academic achievement, they tell you that the worst people are Black folks. They don't do well. But here's the statistics, and you can go out and get it from the United States Department of Education, statistics on academic achievement and ranking 2020. 90%, 90.2% of white students graduated high school. 85% of them went on to college. 95%, 95.7% of Asian American people that they brought here, that immigrated here, completed high school, and 92% of them went on to college. 89.3% Black people, whether you were indigenous or an ex-slave, a descendant of a slave, completed high school. 85% of you went on to college and completed college. 78.6% Hispanic people, and all other people below the Hispanic line, Asian Islanders, all these other groups of people graduated high school. 17.8% of them went on to college.
Wow.
But what did they say in the article? Black folks don't go to college. But we're at 85%, and everybody else is below us.
As the young kids say, the math ain't mathing.
No, it's not. The top three tier, white people, or really Asians, Chinese, and Japanese Americans. Not all Asians. Chinese and Japanese Americans went to school more and went on to college. White people came second. Black folks was third. Indigenous population and those that are descendants of slaves, we went on to complete college. Completed high school, completed college. Hispanics were below us. I'm not dampening them or saying anything negative. I'm just saying these are the statistics that they bring out. But what do? They always throw it up in your mind that we are failures. And they help that with No Child Left Behind. The No Child Left Behind did not allow children to be successful. It created a very hostile environment within the school. The rigid guidelines of only working on language, English, and math became the most critical thing that they wanted. And if you did not succeed in those two areas, they would fail you, even though you exceeded in science, history, geography, all the other subjects. It did not matter. Those two were the primary ones. And if you didn't do well in that, that was the reason to hold you back. It made a lot of Black parents very angry. And, our voices will be heard. So once the program was stopped, what did they do? They went back to Elementary Secondary Standard Act under Barack Obama. Okay. There was a minor twist in it, but they went back to basically what Lyndon Johnson had. The only twist was that they were trying to make it a system where you could transfer from one state to go to a college in another state based on your high school achievement scores. And what they did was that they tried to standardize that by saying you have to have so many high school credits everywhere. It didn't matter what high school you went to, and it had to fall within certain categories. And that included language, math, science, geography, history, social studies. And so it wasn't just math and it wasn't just English. So by having that there, students whose parents may have been in the military or who moved for whatever reason would be able to continue their education in high school until they got to the college level and not be put back 2 or 3 grades.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't want to go into all the specifics because there's just so many, but it was House Resolution 283. I have said, did the link ever come to you?
It didn't come to me. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, I'm gonna have to find a way to get this information to you,
Okay.
and he can give it to all of you all
Yeah,
too.
I'll let you guys in the chat. What I'll do is, you guys in the chat, all the information that the sister has given us and is valuable information is pertinent to what goes on and some of the things that we see that happens. What I'll do is I'll put it in the community section
Mm-hmm.
on Let's Talk To, and if I don't put it there, I'll put it in this chat on the replay, so
Mm-hmm.
we could all look it up and understand it and be able to use it to look at your own personal situation, and maybe because we'll get into what Sister Azima has done with her children, because I know she did homeschooling,
I did homeschooling.
and it's
Um,
very important that we, like she said, we get to understand one thing about critical race theory and why so many people don't want it taught to
you can't teach
elementary
it.
school students. You
It is
can't
not. It's not anything you can teach. It is a
you
policy created by politicians
yeah.
as a means of tracking racial academic achievement. There is
And for
nothing
you,
to teach.
yeah, for
Unless
you,
you are a lawyer or a politician or a judge, you can't learn anything from critical race theory. There is no course in critical
yeah.
race theory. It was
This
developed, I'm sorry.
and this is amazing that she even addressed it, because I know that a lot of people been hearing this statement, critical race theory. Um, in the last election, Dr. Winters even explained some ramifications of critical race theory. One thing I know about when I was in school to be a paralegal, because critical race theory, from a legal standpoint, uh, Professor Bell got known for it. Like Sister Zima said, you really can't teach that. It's basically you. That's something that a lawyer or somebody that knows law has to explain, because, like she said, it goes back to, you got to do shepherdizing. You got to do casework for this stuff. You can't just wake up one day and say, "I'm gonna learn critical race theory." But anyways, excuse me, Sister Azima, as you were
Sure.
saying.
Yeah, it's not anything. So don't ever let anybody tell you, oh, we can teach it in schools. It is not. It was developed at the end of the Civil War by the Southern Dixiecrat politicians for the sole purpose of racially profiling and tracking academic success of freed slaves. There is no schooling for that. It is a policy that was put into place. And most people had to go to the historically black universities and colleges because there weren't any elementary schools or secondary schools. When desegregation came along, and right on the heels of Martin Luther King being killed, and also on the heels of Brown versus Board of Education, they developed the Elementary and Secondary Standard Act. Secondary means high school. So the way it was when I was growing up, college was not an issue. Unless you were going to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, you didn't go to college. You went to, and there were trade schools for being a nurse. There were trade schools for catering. There were trade schools for carpentry, air conditioning. There were trade schools for plumbing. You went to a trade school for 90% of the work that you see out here. You went to a trade school. High schools had trades in them. The high school I went to, you had shoe repair, dry cleaning. Um, you had seamstress there. You had textile workers designing clothes. You had cooking classes to be caterers or to work in restaurants as a master chef, sous chef. You had we had mechanical school, auto mechanics, truck mechanics. We had truck driving school at high school, because not everybody wanted to go to college and not everybody was academically astute or financially able to go. So you went to a trade school and you learned a trade. How many of us know a plumber? When I grew up, I knew plumbers, I knew bricklayers. They're a dime and a dozen. And I have grandsons now. I'm like, oh, it's great you want to be that, but can you go out there and change a tire, fix a car? Can you lay brick? I learned to lay bricks because my father made me learn. Me and my sister, my parents had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. My grandfather spent a lot of time with me. I learned from my cousins who were all masons, top masons. They were a master. I know how to lay brick. I know how to put mortar in. Would I do it now at this age? No, because it's a very tedious a laborer's job, and they need to be paid for that.
So
I know.
how do you do you think that it was purposeful with
Yes,
intent when they
because
took the trades out of the schools?
yes, and the reason they took it out of the school was who was going to school and benefiting. The poor white people, which did not exceed the middle class white. Okay, middle class white people was anybody that was a team lead. Middle class white people were people that had patronage jobs. And I know that doesn't make any sense to you. The new standards that you all now see where you have to be academically astute to get your job, that didn't exist when I came along. Joe Smith and Mr. Kraken were good friends. Mr. Kraken told Joe Smith, send your boy. I know he's staying in trouble. But send him to me, I'm gonna make him work. He gonna owe me something. That's how we got those jobs. That's how police officers became police officers. There was no academy for police. There was no school for the fire department. If you came out of a rural fire department region, and rural means you volunteered, when there was a fire, everybody got together like they do among the Amish and all other forms of society. Everybody came to help put the fire out at whoever's house it was. Unless they didn't like you, then nobody showed up on time. Okay. But basically, it was a community effort to keep the community intact.
Hmm.
Okay. Like we said, it takes a whole village to raise a child, it takes a whole village to make a civilization. So, this role model that you see now came off of us. What you see with the white industry here in America now came from the indigenous black people here who they don't want to call Indians. Okay. That council, where you had a Congress or a council, that was derived from the indigenous Native Americans here. This area was known as Turtle Island. So the Choctaw and Shawnee and the, Blackfoot and the Crow, they were all black. California is named after a group of Amazon black women known as California, and they were tall women, 6'11" to 7'2". They were warriors. So my whole thing is that we we have to learn ourselves. We are not a victim here. Not in there are prejudiced people in this world. Most of them live in America. I hate to say it, but the majority of them live here in America. When I had a chance to travel the world and come back to America, I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah,
Ooh,
explain what you had told me about this racism word.
the word racism means anyone that has the ability. It came about, racist, came about during the Kentucky Derby time. If you were able, because most of the jockeys were black. Remember that. Most of your jockeys were black because many of them were pygmies. They added no weight to the horse. They could sit in the surrey, which was behind the horse, and guide that horse to win. The best guy across was the racist. And most of the time, he was a black guy. So that's the etymology of a word, how they take words and change the meaning of a word. Like the word willow, we think it's just a tree, but a willow is a young boy. A faggot is it's sticks that you use to barter with. Faggot. Who would ever know that? You don't know that. So your words have been changed over time. I laugh when I hear Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Do you know what that word means, Schwarzenegger? It means tall black. Schwarzenegger. Neger is black, or negus, Nagas, negus. It's black. Swath means swarthy. Swarthy means black. So Arnold Schwarzenegger is a big black man. Douglas means the great black. Mac Donald means the black knight. And we don't mean he wore armor that was black. The black knight meant he was a black man that was a knight. Okay. In Germany, many of the German families had the totem or the cross from black houses where they themselves, the de Medicis, were black. You already know about the Three Musketeers. It was four of them. They were black. GPS was developed by a woman by the name of Sally. You use it every day on your cell phone, called Google Maps. GPS, she did that for the military. Think of all the
Someone,
cities:
someone asked,
Rosewood, East
someone
St.
asked,
Louis.
and he's a
Go
supporter
ahead.
of the show. He said, "Who is this beautiful woman? Oh my God!"
Okay, so I would like to come back and we just have a whole course on etymology, the study of words, so we can break them down and how they affect you now because you're not familiar with this root origin.
You want me
And
to ask the chat? Do you want to come back?
yes, you need to please ask
Oh,
them.
oh. Hope everybody in the chat heard Sister Azima. She said, "Can she come back and she do a whole show on entomology?" Let us know by thumbs up. They'll let us know. Please do.
Thank you, Ebony. So I want to wrap this up real quick. So the No Child Left Behind didn't work. It went back to the the Elementary Secondary Standard Act under Barack Obama reinstituting Lyndon Johnson's program. And with that, the only change was that when you're when you're moving from one state to another, it's a standardized form, I think, of 22 to 24 credit hours that you have to have in order to graduate from high school. And so I think that's the only standardization piece that's there. And you won't be faced with in one state you have 18 credits to graduate, in another state it's 32. No, they made it standardized across the board. That has been helpful. Um, what I've also seen is that the increase in the homeschooling or alternative forms of education for our children has really helped them. We have a lot more students that are being accepted at Yale, Harvard, MIT, Whitney, Cornell. It just becomes a natural process for them. Our children are naturally intelligent, and that is a gift of having carbon energy, dark matter energy in your life. It doesn't make us hostile. It doesn't make us look at others with disdain. I think a lot of people are afraid for all that they've done. If there wasn't them, the fact that they benefited from the prejudice of previous family members. Those family members at one time used to meet with other people, entities, organizations in order to continue on a certain path. Um, but we say the more you know, the more you grow. I want us to grow out of this controlled environment. Believe me, they are, as we wake up every day and look at what's going on. you can see how the current status, and this has nothing to do with our current politicians, but everything to do with the mindset of America. If you look at the mindset of Rome after 500 years of its control or domination with the Borgias, the Catholic Church, they failed miserably. Okay. We are now seeing the fall of America. The reason it hasn't fallen so dramatically is really because of our need to be spiritual people. I didn't say religion, because religion is an organized method of looking at spirituality. Same way like critical race theory, same principle as No Child Left Behind. They get to tell you how you need to pray, who you need to pray to. And so you are a spiritual entity unto yourself. That's why you have an inner standing, an interpersonal relationship with your, he's not just your God, it's everybody's God, but you have a personal relationship with that. You are a fragment of that light energy of God. And when you have that understanding and that personal relationship, what people call miracles, you call my one on one conversation. And I am able to get things done. I am able to move forward.
Well, you guys, I know you got some of the conversation that I'm allowed to get. I really appreciate Sister Azima for coming through, and we're going to
Okay.
set up a date when she can do entomology, and she can explain it and explain how these words have changed and how, as she was telling me the other day on the phone, how understanding, because I wrote it down, them certain seven components of your circle and
Yeah.
how you deal with your circle and how you should be able to navigate in your daily life. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe. And Sister Azima, the pleasure has been all mine. Appreciate everything that you've done and appreciate that you've came for. Remember, you guys, we always talk about black excellence. And I don't mean to, but I need to give Sister Azima her flowers because she's an engineer, you guys. At a time where it wasn't too many black females engineers, so she's an engineer, so by trade, but an educator, I believe. I think she was born to be a teacher. To be honest with you,
Yeah, my mother told me that. But I know that right now, where my life is leading me, I have 5 daughters, and all of them have a business, and I've been working with them. And our business is around healing, helping people, teaching them how to heal, how to be able to. Um, Everybody talks about how you eat and all these wonderful things. Well, Valerie, we'll see. I don't mind working with you.
who's
I wish,
Valerie? Valerie Thomas's Sister
yeah,
Azima?
yeah, that's what she said. I wish I could work with you.
That's Ebony. Ebony said that.
Oh,
I
I'm
wish.
sorry. She could work
Ebony
with
said,
Valerie Thomas. Okay.
yeah.
All right. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Okay. So basically, what's going on is that right now we have developed healing teas and detoxing teas. I am in school now to be a naturopath and an herbalist. And I want to work with doctors who are willing to use all, they call it alternative medicine. But remember now, before there were doctors,
Hippocrates used alternative medicine, and he's considered the first doctor, right?
right? Well, the word medicine means mobile healer. That's the origin of the word. It's medicusis. It means mobile healer.
No, she ain't from Ebony. She's not from the DMV. She is from the St. Louis area.
Mhm.
She's a retired engineer.
So now I'm working in that realm, and I like it, and I enjoy helping people sustain themselves and do better, to better understand how their body works, how it moves and vibrates to certain frequencies, and then the way you eat, the way you care for yourself, it makes a big difference. Um, all of us have good roots. I hear people say, "Oh, my family lived to their 100," and then they die at age 54, and that's their environment and their circumstances, and they are ignorant of those two things. Okay. So yeah, I thank you for inviting me. I hope I was of some help with you. The information that I do have, I will get it to Quentin, and he will be able to get it to you all. I just want you to look at this, and you'll go, you know, like uh, like Arsenio Hall used to say, things that make you go, And so that's what I want. I want to end with that. Arsenio Hall used to always say, things that
And,
make you go,
and one thing about another thing about education before we close out, if you look at state government, federal government, whenever it is time to cut the budget, the first thing they do is cut the budget of education. Military, they have a blank check. Education gets cut first. So with
mm.
that, remember, like, share, subscribe. Appreciate you guys in the chat. And we're gonna set something up. It'll be soon, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll have a long discussion on etymology and language and understanding words and where these words come from and how the dominant society has used these words to try to change the meanings. With that, take care. Hold on. Take care, everyone, and have a great night.